All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. Excuse the voice. I'm coming off of the back end of a bout with COVID, and so vocal cords are a little bit worn down here still. This episode, we're going to talk about Brother Brad Wilcox and the hoopla that has gone on this week from his fireside last Sunday night, a youth fireside with 3 stakes in Alpine, Utah. And the comments that he made about race and the priesthood, a few other things as well. But I want to go over a few things that maybe I think they're going to give a little bit more of a nuanced approach than what's usually been put out there on both sides of this controversy, right? First of all, I want to talk about exactly what was said by Brad Wilcox. I want to go over his apology. I want to talk about a little bit of the historical context of the Priesthood Ban, because I think that's important to note so that we can understand a little bit more about when things are brought up about this. We need a greater understanding. A lot of what we hear is simply a kind of a bumper sticker reaction to things on one side or the other. And we need more context. We need more anchor points when discussing this. I want to talk a little bit about the reaction also that has come back on both sides again. But you know, a lot of this is very much against Brother Wilcox. And while I think there is there's something to it in terms of criticism, the overall sentiment that is being tossed at Brother Wilcox, I think is not appropriate. But let me go into that a little bit and explain what I mean. First of all, let's talk about exactly what was said by Brad Wilcox. Did he say something racist? Because that's the implication, is that he was being racist. And I think that that's a little bit of a stretch to say that based on his comments. Let's see what he said. He says this to the kids. He says, "Now, sadly, you live in a time where a lot of people get uptight about priesthood issues. One of the most glorious things we have in the church, and yet people want to sit and fight about it and get uptight about it. I don't mean to oversimplify a complex issue," he says. "I sure think we make it a little harder than it needs to be." I'm going to go exactly the opposite of what he says here. I think you have to go more complicated. It's not as simple as he's making it out. And that's one of the problems that he has in saying this. Now, he goes on and says, maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe instead of saying, why did the blacks have to wait until 1978? Maybe what we should be asking is, why did the whites and other races have to wait until 1829? First of all, I don't think that's the best verbiage there to be using about races there. But that is, look, it's not like that's not a thought, but it's an incomplete thought. And I want you just for a moment to, if you're not black, put yourself in their shoes to understand this, right? This is why he's oversimplifying it. This is why he is oversimplifying the issue here about timing, about God's timing, right? He goes into the Levites and he talks about the whites not getting the priesthood until 1829. The problem is he is not acknowledging a major diss to people of African descent. You can't just sweep that under the rug. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like he is sweeping it under the rug. It's not that it's racist. It's that it's dismissive. I'm sure that's the easy thing for him to do. He says he wants to oversimplify it. It sounds to me more like he's trying to make it easy. And it's not an easy issue. I'm going to show you why. The comparisons in using the Lord's timing with, okay, only the Levites had the priesthood for a long period of time. And that, you know, the priesthood wasn't restored to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery until 1829. Fine, but it's not complete, and you got to be complete. And I think that is the major problem here. I think that's where he lacks in the context of his comments. I do not think what he said was racist. I don't think it is malicious. I think it was insensitive, and I think it was dismissive. I've seen a lot of comments online about Brad Wilcox did nothing wrong. Brad Wilcox said nothing wrong. To me, it's not what he said by itself. It's what he didn't say. I don't think it's right for him to be putting out the narrative of this narrative that he has over and over again. It appears several times without bringing in the black perspective on that. Right? It's not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of perspective. And you've got to bring that in. You have to bring that in. And you can't forward the narrative without an understanding that there is an apparent dismissiveness. Right? There is a dismissiveness to our black brothers and sisters when you don't add that in. You've got to give more context. And I know, especially with kids, it's harder to do that because, you know, it's like we don't know very much about why the ban happened. We don't know that. I'm going to go into that as well. And so it's you don't want to open up a can of worms in a devotional, in a fireside, and now I have to talk all about this. But you know what? I think you have to some degree. We've got to learn how to talk about this better. Now, he goes on and apologizes, and I think it's the right thing to apologize. Again, I wish he would have said this a little differently, but this is what he says. He says, "I made a serious mistake last night, and I am truly sorry. The illustration I attempted to use about the timing of the revelation on the priesthood for black members was wrong," right? So he's talking about the timing here of, again, it's using the whole idea of using God's timing. When is the timing going to happen? There are some relevant issues there. He's right. There are some timing issues there, perhaps. They may not have been on the front end with Brigham Young, but they may be on the back end, right? All the way up toward Spencer W. Kimball. I'm going to go over that too. He says, "To those I offended, especially my dear black friends, I offer my sincere apologies and ask for your forgiveness. I am committed to do better." Okay, I think somebody helped him write that, because those are very common phrases in these types of apologies that are made. So he does apologize for this, and I think that's good. I think it's good. Like I said, I wish they'd get into it a little bit more, because what happens then, if you go to the Utah news stations, which I would not recommend, and a lot of the writing and a lot of what gets put on social media, again, it's just such a bumper sticker reaction. Nobody really talks about what exactly was said and what was wrong and how it could better be stated. It's just simply, was this racist? It was racist. It was not racist. The coverage on this has been horrible. First of all, I've heard a lot of things that have been mentioned about tying the Gospel Topics essay on the church website of race and priesthood with his comments. There's nothing in common there between the two of those. In other words, there's nothing that he says that goes against the essay on race and the priesthood. And I've seen that mentioned several times. It's not true. Go look at it yourself. That's not the problem, right? He's not advancing a narrative that the essay discounts or goes against now, right? It's just that what he's saying is not complete. It's not put into perspective. We need a little more perspective. I want to go over a little bit of the history on this quickly to give us some context on his words and take a look at really what the issue is with the ban on the priesthood. If we go all the way back to obviously Joseph Smith's time, you have Elijah Abels, possibly a couple of others at the time of Joseph Smith, at least Elijah Abels in the 30s, and a couple more in the 40s, 1840s, of black men that are ordained to the priesthood, right? After Joseph Smith's death in 1847, you have a black member of the church, a man named William McCary. And something very interesting starts to happen here in 1847. William McCary is a runaway slave. He's baptized into the church in Council Bluff, Iowa, right, in February 1846. He moves on to winter quarters in Nebraska. He marries a member of the church, a white woman there, a member of the church. And then he starts starts preaching about how he is able to appear as a character, as some of the characters of the Bible and of the Book of Mormon, that he appears as them at times. Some strange things that he starts to bring up. And so that's kind of throwing people off a little bit. Of course, a number of people here who are not used to seeing a mixed race marriage are having some issues with him to begin with. And so the claims of his preaching are not helping this at all. Going beyond this, he marries some additional women, white women, members of the church. And so he is a polygamist. And this makes people more and more uncomfortable. And the person it really makes uncomfortable is Brigham Young. Brigham Young doesn't have an issue with the mixed marriage. He doesn't here anyway. He may later on. What he has a problem with is the children of a mixed marriage. That's what he has an issue with. And he ties that into the seed of Cain. He does. And that is an erroneous issue. That is an erroneous issue. So William McCary is excommunicated for all of these issues that he has. He runs off back to Missouri with his first wife. And this seems to be the beginning of a turn of events for ordaining black men into the priesthood. And we have the 1852 announcement from the pulpit of the legislature, right, from Brigham Young about the priesthood ban, which also is a ban essentially on governing in the state of in the territory of Utah. But it's really 1849, 3 years earlier, where we see that there is no more, right? There's not going to be any more ordinations into the priesthood starting in 1849. But here is the major issue with our understanding of what's going on during that time frame. There's no revelation ever presented by Brigham Young in regards to the priesthood ban. We need to understand that. There's nothing ever presented by Brigham Young. And so the first thought I would have is, okay, well, then there was no revelation. You would think if there was a revelation, a big term, this is something that would be written down, right? That he would have this written down and presented to the church, but it's not. It's more, and this is what later prophets call it, it's a policy that gets put into place. Unfortunately, what this leaves the later prophets of the church, the presidents of the church, is they have nothing to grapple with. They have nothing to look at to say, okay, this is what he received, this is what it said, and therefore this is why we should not lift the ban. So without having that in place as an anchor for the presidents of the church, and so they're waiting for a revelation to overturn this priesthood ban. And they keep trying to get a revelation. And here's where another problem arises, right? They attempt to get a revelation from the Lord to overturn the ban. But it doesn't come. And this is what is said by several of the prophets. For example, we can go back to the time of David O. McKay, when this really starts to change. Up until then, there's a little more of a grounding in of hey, this is doctrinal, this is the way the Lord wants it. But David O. McKay starts to say, wait a minute here. We need to look at moving beyond this ban here. And he says, and I quote, that it is not doctrine, but policy. President McKay tells Elder Marion D. Hanks that he had pleaded and pleaded with the Lord, but had not had the answer he sought. Now, he dies in 1970, and he says in the last 3 years of his life, he says, I've inquired of the Lord repeatedly. The last time I did it was late last night. I was told, with no discussion, not to bring the subject up with the Lord again, that the time will come, but it will not be my time, and to leave the subject alone. So that seems like, I mean, he's writing it down. He's being told that it's not the time yet. So is it the Lord's timing? That's, you know, again, there's not some context that's put in there, but I'm just, don't shoot the messenger here, right? I'm telling you what David O. McKay said that the Lord told him. Now, Spencer W. Kimball, back as an apostle in 1963, says the following: our direct and positive information is limited. I have wished the Lord had given us a little more clarity in the matter. And this is, again, they don't know what, they don't know what's going on. The Lord has not given them the clarity, and Brigham Young certainly did not give them the clarity on this. They don't know. How do we deal with this? We have to have, they feel they've got to have a revelation to move beyond this. They're kind of in between a rock and a hard place here. He goes on and says, I know the Lord could change his policy. So he calls it the Lord's policy. But then he says he could change his policy and release the ban and forgive the possible error which brought about the deprivation. If the time comes, that he will do, I am sure. Right? So in 1963, Elder Kimball is already, it seems to me, leaning toward, look, this looks to me like this was a gross error to begin with. This was something that should not have happened. And so you see this, they want to turn this. They want to change this. But they need a revelation. And they're not getting it. And then we get this in 1969 from the counselors in the First Presidency. And this goes along with going back to what Brigham Young had believed about the priesthood ban. He says, a contradictory and confusing legacy of racist religious folklore has grown up among the saints to explain banning blacks from the priesthood. So they're very concerned about this. And this is something that still is in the church a lot today because we've read it in certain books, right? And it's not true. And this is where the race and the priesthood gospel topics essay definitely, clearly comes out and rejects this folklore, right? About blacks being from the seed of Cain or from the seed of Ham, or the curse being is from them, from Ham and from Cain is on those of African descent. The essay comes out and says that's ridiculous. No, that's not true. But that is what Brigham Young believed. And we need to know that. The other one that goes along with that in the church is the idea that that people of African descent were less valiant in the premortal world, right? That made its, that traveled around quite a bit also. Also folklore, complete folklore. It's not true. Now, Brad Wilcox didn't bring either of those up, right? That was not part of what he brought up. Those are the things that are mentioned in the Gospel Topics essay. Again, the beginning of that statement from the counselors in the First Presidency, a contradictory and confusing legacy of racist religious folklore. So they're in 1969, they're calling these things the idea of the seed of Ham, the idea of the seed of Cain, the idea of the lack of valiant spirits in the premortal world. These are racist religious folklore is what they call it. So they're pretty clear about that. Again, not what Brad Wilcox talked about. And you can see this in the summary of the official declaration number 2, that they don't know, right? Here's what it says. It says, church leaders stopped conferring the priesthood on black males of African descent. Church records offer no clear insights into the origins of this practice. Church leaders believed that a revelation from God was needed to alter this practice and prayerfully sought guidance. It's a conundrum. It's a problem. But again, you gotta, to me anyway, you've got to wonder why this was not written down by Brigham Young. If it was a revelation, right? You would think it would be written down if it was a revelation. So lastly, I want to get to the reaction on this. And this is varied, again, on both sides, where you say, like I said earlier, that there are a number of people that said Brad Wilcox did nothing wrong. He said nothing wrong. And look, I support Brother Wilcox. He's a good man, and he's a good servant of the Lord. And I don't believe that he said anything that was racist. I do not. But I do think he was insensitive, and I do think that he was inconclusive or exclusive in his discussion on this. And I don't think you can do that. We have to have a new way of talking about this. We have to have a way of talking about this that does not disrespect, because it does. In the way that he does it, he is, in my mind, he's disrespecting those of African descent. I don't think he's being racist, but there's disrespect there, and it's dismissive. It's dismissive, and I really think that if you put yourself in their shoes, you can see that. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that. We should acknowledge it, and have a better way of bringing that context in and talking about it. I talk a lot about President Oak's idea of clear thinking, right? And I think that's what we have to have here. We have to have clearer thinking and a clear statement of how we talk about the priesthood ban. Now, having said that, on the other side, to me, it's been ridiculous on kind of the reaction. I do think some criticism is warranted on this, and I've offered my own here, right? At the same time, of course, those that already have an agenda in place and those that like to tear things down and to cancel people and to work with strong reactions off of microaggressions and other statements, they're going after him. This is very similar to what happened with President Elder Holland in his address last summer to the faculty of BYU, right? With his talk about defending the family doctrine. And now there's some differences there as well, of course. I think there's more of an openness here with Brother Wilcox on criticism because of the narrative that he's putting out there, the incomplete narrative. But in the end, here's what I see always with this, because this isn't going to be the last time this happens. Because of video that's available everywhere, because of social media, and I've experienced this myself with this podcast or with being on social media, right? It's just, there's a policing that goes on, a strong policing that goes on, and it could be a word that you use, It could be phrases. It could be a talk like with Brad Wilcox here. But beyond the priesthood ban here, there's been accusations of misogyny, right? There's been accusations of xenophobia. There's been accusations against the way he talks about other religions. And you know, again, he could say things that are better, but there's nothing wrong with saying there's only one true church. There's a reason why people choose to be Latter-day Saints, because they believe it is the one true church. But you can see that there's criticism here, then there, then with this, then with that, right? That is about canceling. It's not just now about race and the priesthood. It's about canceling. It's about going after somebody. It's the same thing you can see with Joe Rogan, right? First, it's about the misinformation about COVID. Then it's about racism. Then it's about transphobia. Then it's all these other things because they want to cancel him. We've seen this several times with professors across the country on both sides, both on a conservative side and on a left-leaning side. And so the question then is, well, where does that leave, especially looking at BYU, for example? I mean, you've got a really interesting case here because BYU, I think, came out with a horrendous reaction to this, a knee-jerk reaction, basically framing by implication Brad Wilcox as his statements being racist. I would like to know, they should explain exactly why they think what he said was racist, if they're going to do that. Otherwise, it's just an accusation. It's empty and void, and it's preposterous. And I think that they should rescind that and give a much better response than what they did. But he's not only a professor at BYU in religious studies, but he's also the second counselor, one of the counselors, I think the second counselor in the General Young Men's Presidency. So you have the church angle over here also. So apparently you're going to have the Office of Belonging. I'm not sure if that's formed yet at BYU, that's going to be reviewing this and going over this with Brad Wilcox as a professor at Brigham Young University. How does that affect his status with the church as basically as someone who fills a general calling in the Young Men's Presidency? I don't know. But this isn't the last time this is going to happen. This will happen a lot over and over and over again. And I hope that as we look at this, we can exercise a little more clear thinking about it. And there are times, certainly, where there's going to be warranted criticism. And I think there is warranted criticism here. But there's also a piling on. There's also a tearing down. There's also a lot of people that are, taste blood in the water, and they're going to circle around and around, and they're ready to tear things down. So on both sides of this, I think you've got to take a little bit of this with a grain of salt and think it through. Thanks for your time.